we are. So welcome to this session on the importance of market transparency for the smooth functioning of agricultural markets. My name is Denis Drechsler. I'm the project manager of the G20 Agricultural Market Information System, AMIS, hosted by FAO. I'll have the honor to give a brief overview presentation to get us started here. And then I will also moderate this session, which is a kind of a last-minute change that we had. Given the weather situation a couple of days ago at Frankfurt Airport, some of our panelists could not make it to Berlin. They are online, including the moderator, but we felt that having an in-person moderation makes the session hopefully a bit more lively. Which brings me to a couple of housekeeping remarks. The session will be in English. You will have translation into German. In case you have not yet done so, please pick up your headset, which is outside the meeting room. To the extent possible, we would like to engage with you, so have your questions ready. If possible, because all the panelists are English speakers, try to have your questions in English. But if that is not possible, they also have headsets here, so that will be translated. And for the panelists, I understand they do not get translation. I will try to summarize the gist of the questions then for them. So if German is the only option, please feel free to still take the floor. That is not a problem. We try to have that session, interactive. As I mentioned, we do want to have you engage with your questions, with your comments. We have quite a number of speakers from our side. We try to keep it brief. I might also interrupt at half point, let's say, to already bring you in, and then certainly at the end of towards the end of the session, we leave plenty of room for questions and answers. Anything really that you want to know, what is unclear, if you want us to deepen anything, any comments that come to mind. So with that, I would be grateful if my slides could come up. So today we're going to talk about the power of information, really, the importance of information, the importance of transparency for markets, for the smooth functioning of markets. And we do that looking specifically at the work of AMIS. As I said, AMIS stands for the G20 Food Market Information System. We're going to do that in two parts. We're going to talk a little bit about what AMIS is, why it was created, how it is functioning, to familiarize you a little bit with this instrument, which has existed now for 12 years, I believe, by now. And then we're going to look at how the system really functioned and whether or not delivered on the promises that people had when it was created. So in a nutshell, AMIS was created in 2011 on the heels of the 2007-2008 food price crisis. It's maybe a bit difficult to see here. In the background of this slide, you see the FAO food price index over the past 30 years or so. This is our barometer of how international food prices are evolving. And as you can see, there was a long period of relative calmness. When in 2007-08, there was a rather sudden and very abrupt and strong spike in prices. And that continued until 2010, 2011. And that led G20 leaders and then the ministers of agriculture of G20 countries to create AMIS with the objective to enhance food market transparency, to provide regular updates on the supply and demand situation of basic food crops, and we focus here on wheat, maize, rice, and soybeans. And that is also very important, to provide a platform for effective, regular policy dialogue, technical dialogue also, of the main producing and consuming countries of these commodities. So as you can see, if you continue on the timeline here of the food price index, prices did come down and stayed also relatively low, but we just experienced another crisis situation, so prices did come up. And AMIS really had its first real test already during the COVID period, but then with the war in Ukraine even more so. That is a little bit the background of our discussion today, how, whether or not AMIS made a difference, and if so, how. From what we hear from for policymakers, given the recent experiences, there was a need to further strengthen the system and maybe even expand it. And we're now also going into other markets beyond wheat, maize, rice, and soybeans to cover fertilizer and vegetable oils, and to also look more closely at food trade logistics. AMIS is a global initiative. As I said, it comes from the G20. It's not limited to the G20, and it's uniting really the main market players around the globe for the crops that we're monitoring. You see here on the world map the AMIS, the G20 countries in blue, that already cover the bulk of production and trade, and in many cases also consumption of the commodities that we're covering. We did also invite several countries that are non-G20 members simply for their importance in markets on the African continent, that is Egypt and Nigeria, as very important food importing countries for wheat and rice mainly. We have Ukraine and Kazakhstan as very important producing countries, and then we have 3 Asian countries, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines, that were invited for rice production and consumption. With this setup, and that is how AMIS started, we covered 80 to 90% of global production, in the case of soybeans even up to 95% of production, and then trade. Rice was, let's say, always a little bit the weaker one, but we were recently happy to be able to update this slide, and Bangladesh joined. This is another orange dot that you see there on the Asian continent. Of course, a very important player, especially in rice markets, and now we're up to 85% of rice production there. So a very positive development, also showing maybe the growing relevance of AMIS. AMIS is hosted by FAO. As I mentioned, this is where I am based in Rome, but it is not limited and owned by FAO. It is made up of 9 other international organizations that are forming the interagency secretariat. You see the logos listed below there, and if you're familiar with some of these logos, you will recognize that these are also really the main international organizations that are active in the monitoring and policy dialogue related to agricultural production, agricultural markets. So a very strong network also of international organizations. And we're working together, or we try to, that's at least our ambition, in a truly collaborative spirit. That is starting with the Secretariat. That is quite a unique setup that 10 international organizations on a regular basis coordinate their information and agree on a common message. Everything that is produced by AMIS is released in the name of the AMIS Secretariat, not under each individual's organization brand. And we have the same type of spirit for collaboration also among the AMIS participants, and then the organizations with the AMIS participants. And we do that in several groups. For the Secretariat, we have a Secretariat Steering Committee, and we have, which is headed by the Secretary. Unfortunately, the person who was acting as the Secretary over the past 2 years cannot be with us here in person, but he is online, Mr. Joe Glauber. So I'll try to bring him into the discussion a bit later. Then on the country side, we have a technical working group, which is called the Global Food Market Information Group, and on the policy side, what is called the Rapid Response Forum. Both are headed by a chair country, which is elected for a 1-year term. And also here, unfortunately, the person who is currently the chair, Seth, Meyer, representing the United States Department of Agriculture, cannot be here with us in person, but he is online. And I'm very grateful for both of them, really, to both of them, because for them, sitting in Washington is 3:45 right now in the morning. So in their interest also, let's make this very interesting and engaging so they don't fall asleep. So anyways, thanks very much for this commitment that you're showing here. And we try to get you into discussion very soon. As I said, our main bread and butter is really to provide regular information on a timely basis, relevant information. We have as our main output the AMIS Market Monitor that comes out 10 times a year, so basically on a monthly basis. The only 2 months that we skip. And then we have more regular online resources, databases, dashboards, and so forth, also policy dashboard database, all providing the most up-to-date and correct information that we know from the countries, in dialogue with the countries, but also in dialogue with other information providers. But we're doing much more. In order to, first of all, get better information from the countries, we are also trying to strengthen capacities in countries at national levels. We're working very closely with designated focal points in these countries. We've had several activities, multi-year capacity building projects in Bangladesh, India, Nigeria, Philippines, Thailand. We've had an exchange program specifically geared towards the focal points in a number of countries. We're producing reference materials, guidance materials. We're trying to harmonize our methodologies, and we organize on a regular basis workshops, and now in the post-COVID period, even more so, online seminars, webinars, and so forth. And with all this information, we don't stop there. We try to bring it really to the attention of the policymakers. We promote policy dialogue and information exchange. It's a frank discussion. Some of our meetings are close to the public to really allow an open dialogue and exchange of information. Also, critical views can be voiced there. But this is all done in a highly collaborative and partnership spirit. We have been put to the test several times, and some of those times may have even been forgotten because they then ultimately did not lead to a major crisis. But already in 2012, there were calls for AMIS to organize a rapid response forum since there was a drought in the US in the Black Sea region, seriously threatening outputs there. In 2020, much more closer to heart and in people's memory still, the COVID crisis, which created a lot of uncertainty also on food markets. And then most recently, the Ukraine war starting in 2022. And in all that, AMIS is credited, this is now a very subjective view from the Secretariat, for acting swiftly and effectively and helping to calm markets. But that is really what we're going to discuss here a little bit, controversially also. Maybe we could have done more, maybe we could have done better, or maybe there was no effect at all. But that is also something that we may discuss here. But I'm happy to hand over now to the panel, and I would invite now everybody sitting here in the first row to just come, take the seats. We're still waiting for the Japanese representative. I hope she can join soon. But with that, I will then hand over to the panel, and we're going to start, if I may, with Maximo Torero. He is the chief economist of the Food and Agriculture Organization, so the hosting organization of AMIS. And maybe you could guide us a little bit through your views why the work of AMIS is important to the organization, why the organization decided to host AMIS, and how it's maybe also contributing to the mandate in fighting hunger, which is, of course, the main objective of the FAO. Maximo, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denis, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good morning to all. It's a little bit early, but happy to be with all of you here in the morning. Let me start by saying that, and hi, Joe and Seth, nice to see you so early. For being here, thank you. So let me start by saying that AMIS was something that was built in the Paris G20. And in my perception, could be biased, is one of the initiatives that really have been consistent over time and have played a significant role. And FAO hosted, but as it was clearly mentioned by Denis, this is a multiple agency operation, and that's the whole goal and the whole idea behind AMIS, and of course with the contribution of all the countries which play a crucial role. Now, why is AMIS so important? So as you know, and we have seen in the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen it before in 2007, 2008, in 2011, the agri-food systems is a system that operates under significant risks and uncertainties. Why? Because it's highly concentrated in terms of the exporting countries on cereals. It's highly concentrated also in the logistics side. And it's highly concentrated also in the demand and supply of inputs. So it's really important that we understand that context, because if we have a world where that we will be facing significant shocks, and shocks could be conflicts, could be wars, but also shocks could be climatic shocks or water stress shocks, then of course, if you have few key exporting countries, something happens to one of them, it will immediately be reflected in prices. It will immediately be reflected in excessive volatility, potentially, especially markets as thin as rice. You know, today, rice price keeps going up, the other commodities are going down. So there is a lot of complexities in the market structure. Now, if you have that world where you have risk and uncertainties, then the last thing you want is to have asymmetry of information. Because if you have some people knowing more than others of how the supplies and the demand is evolving, then that will create potentially risk for speculation. Because some people will know better and therefore can work in the markets and get short-term profits. So you don't want that to happen. And that's why AMIS plays a crucial role, because AMIS is trying to bring as much as information as we can to the world so that people understand that they are not in a stress situation, for example, and they don't have to go all nervous to buy in the market because there is some spike in prices. They may know that we are in an excessive volatile period, and that will be for a short period of time. Then markets will come. So all that reduction of asymmetry of information will bring a significant support to the evolution and the smoothing of markets so that markets can play the real role. So that's, I think, where AMIS is central and where we need to keep updating. Now, of course, if we do that, that's not an easy job, no? AMIS started bringing information about stocks. We were successful in bringing information of stocks of most of these commodities, cereal commodities, but there were some problems with some countries. Still, we have problems with some countries, and we need to keep pushing. We need to find alternative ways to resolve cases where we don't have enough information. And for that, we have the beauty of the trade systems, no? That whatever you sell, somebody's buying. So we can try to figure out what are the balances. And also, we need to understand production and try to see how we can more or less estimate the stocks. That's one area of AMIS. With COVID-19, what we found also that logistics was extremely important. And today, logistics is also important, not because of ports being closed, but because of prices of insurance companies going up, and risks that we are facing in the Red Sea, risks that we faced in the Black Sea, and risks that we could be facing because of lower levels of water in the Panama Channel, which are central for us to move commodities across the world. So AMIS needs to know that. So AMIS decided, and that was a decision of last year, that we need to expand on the logistical side, and we need to improve that data and work with our partners to be able to understand that better. But then the other area where we understood that we have an enormous potential because of the institutions working with us, OECD, the World Bank, IFAD, all the players that were working with us as partners of AMIS, is how we can improve our capacity to predict, our capacity to model what will be the impacts of potential shocks, so that we can also inform the world, we can also inform the Rapid Response Forum, what is happening in the world. And that is where we got some support from the Japanese government to try to improve those tools. And that's where we have been working seriously to try to move into this and to build capacities for model-based analysis for future shocks and vulnerabilities of global food markets. And essentially, we're looking at information, we're looking at linking the different models, and trying to simulate and try to understand different shocks on pests and diseases, weather disruptions, economic disruptions, and political and policy disruptions. All of those shocks will affect supply and demand, and will have a consequence in trade, because that's the way countries respond to this type of shocks. And we will try to find and simulate those impacts in advance, so that countries understand what could be happening, and we can be preventive. That's the way AMIS can increase also resilience for the different memberships of their countries. So those are the two areas that we are focusing with all our partners. But again, AMIS cannot be static. AMIS has to be dynamic and has to be preventive and has to work on all the different tools. And we need to learn from the shocks that we are facing. As I said, COVID-19 was a huge learning lesson. Also, the war in Ukraine, which exacerbated the situation after COVID-19, where we were trying to recover and therefore increasing demand. That also we have to learn from it. And that is linking to how trade could operate to facilitate the process, but also how trade could be problematic if we face this type of shocks. So let me stop there, and thank you, Denis.
Thank you, Maximo. Very, very powerful words, and reminding us why AMIS was created and how it is evolving, and the importance of course, always remaining dynamic and responsive to the challenges that we're facing. Let me invite the next chief economist, and this time from the United States Department of Agriculture, so from one chief economist to the next, Seth. Seth Meyer, he has been the chair for the past 2 years of AMIS, and in that capacity, of course, has a very close insight of how AMIS was doing in this crisis situation. He came on board pretty much after the COVID crisis erupted, and then, of course, with the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, there was another uncertainty added. So, Seth, what are your observations now, looking back over the past 2 years as chair? How did you perceive the work of the organizations, the discussions, especially among countries and policymakers in the Rapid Response Forum? Did it make a difference? Was it constructive?
So thank you, Dennis. And Maximo, I always like to follow you because I know the economics will be well covered. So, I appreciate your discussion about market symmetry of information. It's my job here at USDA as well, too. So I think we've got the economics well covered with the elements that Maximo was talking about. So, Dennis, as you mentioned, let's talk a little bit about the Rapid Response Forum, the interactions of countries over the last couple of years. And I think it really has been a very challenging environment. As Maximo talked about, we already had COVID impact, as we saw in Ukraine really put at the forefront again. We had countries who were suffering economic issues coming out of COVID, and then now we have a big spike in a run on prices. So I do think that the Rapid Response Forum, and let's not also forget the relationships built through the IO meeting, kind of the expert and technical meeting occurring twice a year. And so I think absolutely it was an opportunity for expertise to be put on the table for the members of AMIS. That includes not only the countries, but Arnaud is here from IGC, and we've got some really excellent expertise. It brings the countries and the expertise of our international organizations together. And I think over the last couple of years presented some unique challenges. In agriculture, we're always used to the vagaries of weather. We're used to the vagaries of weather. We're used to weather shocks. So we understand kind of the dynamics of information symmetry and the flow of food as being a contributor to market stability. But war in Ukraine presented a unique and serious impact that I think AMIS was able to contribute with market information, discuss the availability of product, I think emphasize very much that food is different and food should flow, and that includes both food and fertilizer. So I think that was another forum here that we talked about grain flowing out of the Black Sea, but other important inputs, and that food is different and food needs to flow. Whatever else is going on, it provided a format to go talk about market information and dig into some of these issues as well, too. So I think the last couple of years, as Maximo indicated, revealed some evolution that we needed for AMIS. That includes things like vegetable oil, and we had some interactions where AMIS contributes to provide information so that policymakers can make better decisions. But we saw some shocks in some markets, including vegetable oils. We also saw shocks in fertilizer markets. So AMIS has stepped up to analyze and further look at some of those markets and can continue to make that contribution. But I think I'll emphasize something, Dennis, which is, if you're doing good and you're providing market information, you always want to do more. So I think that while other countries may talk about their experience, I think I also want to emphasize that this process works best with the post-country participation. And I think we saw that during the war in Ukraine, and that it just comes to the surface, and that food grain volatility relative to feed grain volatility, food grain volatility was more extreme. And so I just want to emphasize also that this process works best with country interactions. And I thought we had really great country interaction and IO interaction during this process. I think I always want more. I think I always want to say that, market information can continue policymakers to make better decisions. But my job is data. I always want more information, more transparency, reduce the friction in the exchange of food, and therefore, the most vulnerable countries are less subject to these shocks within the market. Again, some of them regular shocks that we've observed. But let's be honest, over the last 30 or 40 years, we have seen a number of unusual shocks unrelated to each other. And so I think that explains that maybe that AMIS evolved as well too, and it has, and continue to evolve to deal with some of these issues and continue to make that contribution in smoothing out these markets. So Dennis, I'm going to pass it back to you and let some of the other countries talk about their country experience.
Thanks so much, Seth, for your very encouraging words, and of course, thank you for the stewardship of AMIS over the past 2 years. You've certainly had your part in that success. Before we get to the countries, which is, let's say, the second part of this discussion, let me also bring in Sergiy Zorya from the World Bank. He's the global lead for the global practice of agriculture in the bank. He's in an interesting position. So our paths crossed about 12 years ago when AMIS started, and he was actually very much involved in getting AMIS also off the ground. The bank also helped financially at the time, and then he left us. Can you believe it? But of course, he realized that he needs to return. So he's now back, our focal point for AMIS in the bank. So how do you perceive what has happened for 8 years? I guess 9 years. You didn't really closely follow what was going on. But what is your impression if you compare then and now? What has changed, and your perspective from the bank in particular?
Thank you, Dennis. It's 11 years. I would say 2011, the bank has been, looking back, as we are the proud founding members of this project. It's probably the only one G20 project which was consistently going from presidency to presidency, and we looking at Brazil with the hope that it will be elevated to the new level during your presidency. I wanted to reflect on 2 points. First, on what you asked on how my reflection on what changed in the last 10, 11 years, but also I want to talk a little bit how the World Bank used this information which I see as the global public good, because it really is the global public good. We sometimes underappreciate that information, but it's very useful, and the World Bank uses it a lot, so I'd like to reflect a little bit. But looking back, so the AMIS was triggered by the panic. On the first slide, what you Dennis showed, you showed the relative price stability during the long period of time, and then we have the price shock 2007, 2008. Everybody was concerned. It was something unusual. Everybody was a bit confused what to do, what are the driving forces, all of these, what can be done. The shock was big and unpredictable. I think when we look on the more recent shocks, I think the difference is that we are much better informed. We cannot fully eliminate those shocks. There are supply and demand factors, and there is the geopolitics. COVID, Russian invasion of Ukraine, they affect markets significantly. But I think if we wanted to say what was the impact of AMIS on smoothing the volatility, we need to think on the role of the information asymmetry to volatility. And I think on that specific component, AMIS has done an amazing job to help to calm market to areas where it could contribute. And we've seen that after the initial shock in the early 2022 to the markets, how quickly market supply and demand and diversifying of trade helped to calm down the markets for many commodities. But let me also stop a little bit on the World Bank use. We are in the last 15 months, we mobilized $45 billion in the World Bank to respond to the food and nutrition security crisis. And that's big for us. We planned at that time to mobilize about 30 billion, and we were able to mobilize 45 in 15 months. And that mobilization was informed by a lot of information pieces. And I would say the AMIS information, sort of your monthly updates, were at the core of our updates to our management, what's going on. So we really use that information to understand what's going on and the World Bank can do and what the impacts the global markets, volatility, unpredictability, or stability has on our client countries who are developing countries. Because for the World Bank, it's important to understand what's going on globally, to help locally to respond to those crises. And we have been consistently using the AMIS monitors for those decisions. Second is, I think, what has been useful and was not mentioned so far. The AMIS is the platform where we discuss in the last 10 years what drives the world markets for different commodities. And things change over time. 15 years ago, the things like the biofuels, the speculations, they were there, but they were new things for us, right? We were still guessing what's going on. Now we have all the logistics. We have much better information, and when the COVID came, with the demand during COVID came to know better more on logistics, the AMIS, I think, was better prepared because already work was done and the tracking on the different logistical indicators was done. So we look at the bank and this, we are really happy to participate in those discussions, to share our research experience, because what's unique the AMIS brings to this discussion, the experts. So when we go there, we really trust the conversation. We can derive lessons for us as an institution to inform our response, our management, inform our action. So I would say on the system to have improved data is the one benefit, but I think this platform where we have the better understanding of complexity of the modern global markets. 20 years ago, the markets were much simpler. We had supply and demand, 5 factors which drive all of this. Now it's much more complicated. And I think having the trusted partner as the AMIS, as the platform which discuss these things and bring this information to other members is extremely useful for us. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Sergiy, and great to have you back in the AMIS family, so to speak. And thanks for bringing up this point that, yes, we are dealing here with essentially a public good, a global public good, and sometimes this is overlooked. It's being taken for granted. Now you put kind of a price tag to it. You said, what, 45 billion you raised? I would say it's a fair ask for you that you give us 1% of that, no, for providing this important information that guided that. That would be great. No, of course, this is a bit the problem that we have. Information is taken, in a sense, for granted. You don't see also the adjustments that have been taken over time. At some point, I would like also to hear from Arnaud on that a bit later, how he sees this complementarity maybe also to the work that they are doing, because of course what AMIS is doing is not, wasn't invented with the creation of AMIS. Other agencies, USDA, Seth agency is doing some very similar work to AMIS. But still, there could be a case that we improved together over time. So maybe we can also get into that a bit later. Let me stop here. We already took 45 minutes of the time allocated for this discussion. Is there any questions, let's say, for clarification, something which is not clear, which you want to have specifically addressed by the speakers that already intervened? Yes, I see one hand up. Maybe we'll collect. Okay, and I believe we have somebody passing around microphone. Is that the case? There in the, okay. Okay. So if you could just stand there. There's a microphone just on the stand there. Introduce yourself and please raise your question. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jakob Dehus. I work with Archer Daniel Mitchell's company and do market analysis for agricultural commodities there. So thank you very much for this platform. And my question is one of the main learnings from the last 2 years that agricultural commodity markets turned out to be very crisis resilient. Would you agree to that?
Maybe Maximo.
Sure. I'm not so Seth. Let's start with Seth.
Okay. Seth, you want to take that?
Hey, well, we certainly Maximo. I always hate to go before you. I like to go after you, so I'm going to do it often. But I would say that part of the action, yeah, it's resilient, but I think you need that. Part of that is that information flow. So, folks, there's not a panic response, and I think that's part of what AMIS contributes, right? market information and market information symmetry helps in that resilience and that bounce back. So, well, I think what we learned is that there are potentially lots of different sources of risk. Perhaps before we often thought about it as being largely weather, but I think we've experienced more than just weather in the last couple of years. But I think it does show that additional information flowing into the market, the ability to the market to adapt really does show market resilience. And Dennis, I apologize. I'm sure my audio is a bit muddled, but I'm getting excited when I respond to these questions. And so I need to keep my voice down a little bit lower.
Let me add to that. I will say we need to understand resilience as a continuum. No? It's not a discrete, you are resilient, you are not resilient. Mm-hmm. But clearly, what we saw during COVID-19 was that the agri-food system was pretty resilient. Food was always there. Of course, at the beginning, there was the issue of health, and we forgot about the importance of food. There is no health without food. But later on, that came up. And then the ports started to open and food started to flow. There were logistical problems. That's what we learned also in AMIS, and that's why we have a lot more now. But I think the markets really respond and work out. The job of AMIS is to make that response smooth and to try to reduce asymmetry of information. Recall, at the beginning of COVID-19, if you look at export restrictions in terms of calories traded, there was a significant increase at the beginning. There were many countries that were trying to put export restrictions. AMIS came immediately and showed that there was enough food in the world. There was no reason for countries to overreact or to try to profit from the situation. And then immediately, a few weeks later, the export restrictions start to move out. That was central, because if we allow the panic to happen, then the exacerbation will have been great in a period of huge uncertainty. So I think markets are learning, but AMIS plays a substantial role in trying to help that.
In this context, if I may, a follow-up question. I think you mentioned export restrictions, and so I was following like wheat markets, and I think it's quite impressive. Even when Ukraine, one of the most important wheat exporting countries, disappeared for some months, global trade flows of wheat actually increased, and one driver was India, which usually is not exporting, and then suddenly exported 10 million tons of wheat, and the availability was not limited at all. And what did AMIS play any role? Because I think it's super remarkable in a positive way that India opened its market for export in order, in the end it was quite good, I think, when it comes to food security, availability of basic food, and I think we have seen many examples. You mentioned some COVID, Russia in the past, and India opened the market. No? I think it's super. Did AMIS play any role there?
In the wheat sector, for sure. In the rice sector, we're having challenges also. Mm-hmm, yeah. But bringing that information up to the world and showing what is happening with export restrictions, because still we have problems in wheat. So if we compare with the 2007-2008, we still have export restrictions because of commodity not moving out of Ukraine right now. So those restrictions, and some on Russia, those restrictions are, of course, still affecting. So despite that, the markets are doing well in those commodities. In rice, we have an increase in export restrictions, which is affecting the price of rice right now. So bringing that information out put pressure in countries also to align their policies, because the world knows that there is a problem, and that problem is linked to some policies being put by countries. Now, the other thing that we need to understand, and things are not for free, one of the major consequences that we're going to have of the war in Ukraine is that the diversification of the portfolio of wheat and other coarse grains is going to be more concentrated again, because Ukraine is no longer the key exporter that was before. So that's a medium long-term effect until things recover back. But that's something that increases the concentration and therefore will increase the risk of potential shocks affecting the fewer countries that are still there.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Seth, I'll let you respond briefly to that, but then we want to move to the other part. So go ahead. No, you have the floor.
From a Maximo point, but I want to emphasize one additional element to this, which is I think that some of the messages in this were also that food is different, and my point of that is trading food, trade restrictions on trading food, those are not helpful to the overall global market situation. And I might take a little bit of a different view. We still have higher volatility in wheat and rice prices than we do in things like corn and soybeans, and some of that is based upon country restrictions. those country restrictions, and certainly the threat of vaccines contributing to meat price volatility, but it is also because those are some of the grains where we have seen negative interventions by countries when it comes to export restrictions. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Seth, and thanks also for the question. Let's move now to the other part. So we want to hear from the left side of the panel here, and we start with Catherine Gélin-Laniel. She's the Director of Strategy and Policy in DG Agri, so representing the European Union here. So you maybe, I have a hard time even saying that as a user of information, because at the same time you are also a contributor of that information, and it's this collaborative spirit that I mentioned before. But let's say as a user of this information, how do you see the work of AMIS, and did it help the European Union take good decisions?
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting us to this panel. So we see it positively, that would be my short answer, and we think that this is more necessary than ever. We were one of the, I can say, we were one of the founding, father or mother of this initiative with our member states, and in particular the member states I come from, because if I remember correctly, that was organized, this was done during the French presidency of G20. I don't want to give all the credit, but I think this was a good initiative. I think also what needs to be said is that we are also enriching, and maybe we'll further discuss that later, we are further enriching the work and the activities of AMIS, learning lessons from the different crises, because not all crises have the same origin, drivers, they are all different, so we cannot be, prepared to everything, but at least we learn lessons. So as the EU, how are we using the work of AMIS? Let me say that we are using that on a daily basis with two main objectives. The first one, we are, as you know, a global player when it comes to exporting and importing food. So for us, it is essential that as a contributor both to global food security and our own security, we do not just get access to this market information, which, as you mentioned, we already had in the past and we continue to have with a number of organizations, but we have a platform where we can share analysis, have a better understanding of what's happening, and why, prices are evolving, why markets are expected to react this way or that way. So for us, it is precious. For us, in terms of our own food security, because we have now a market-based agricultural policy, so it has an impact on our farmers and our ability to produce our commodities. We use that obviously also to make sure that what's happening at global level remains, can I put it, doesn't threaten food security. We are, of course, very much supporting global food security. So for us, that's important. And what has happened over the last couple of years have demonstrated that there may be, major implications when it comes to global food security. We think that so far, learning from what has happened since the creation of AMIS, we are very positive when it comes to providing this platform for a discussion. I would say also in terms of responsiveness of AMIS. Let me say that as to illustrate, I was very much impressed, for example, that in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine, a couple of days after you had this rapid response forum, meeting where we discussed and so on, and that was very useful to avoid panic, trade restriction and so on. We are not, I think we need not to be complacent. We cannot, and I think this was said by Maximo, we cannot totally eliminate speculation. We cannot eliminate totally, inadequate trade restrictions and so on and so forth, but we have the duty, the obligation to make sure that we are doing our best to limit the possibility to have that speculation and these inadequate trade restrictions. That's our duty because we are talking about food.
Yes.
Voilà. So this is where we think that AMIS has done a great job so far. And we are extremely also supportive of the additional extra activities or broadening the scope of AMIS activities, as you've mentioned, logistics, obviously new commodities. We think this is very important, and as I said, this is learning from, what has happened with the war in Ukraine. Fertilizers input are very important. I think also we look with a lot of interest at the support that Japan is giving to AMIS, so that you can also further build our capacity to anticipate. We cannot anticipate, so that we are better prepared, and at least that we have information that we can discuss to be better prepared to future crises. So I think I can safely say that we will continue to support you, both as the EU Commission, as well as our member states.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Very encouraging feedback, because ultimately, of course, it is our members that we're serving, the countries, and it's very good to hear that the information and the platform have indeed proved useful. Let me bring in Eduardo Marquez, sitting there at the very end of the panel. He is the agriculture attaché in the embassy of Brazil in Berlin. So Brazil, as many of you may know, holds the current G20 presidency, and the fate of AMIS is intrinsically linked to the G20. So I would like to hear from you. Brazil, of course, also a very important agriculture producing country and a participant in AMIS. But now, specifically with your presidency, it was mentioned, I believe, from Sergiy already, hoping that this continuity with the G20 support will continue. What are your views on AMIS, its usefulness, and its maybe future direction? Eduardo, floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Yes, it will continue. 5 minutes about a little bit about G20 and the Brazilian presidency. We have the big guideline, these beautiful sentences people like to use in this kind of situations, like building a just world and a sustainable planet. That's the guideline of the Brazilian presidency. There are 3 priorities during this year: fight against poverty and inequality, promote sustainable development in its 3 pillars, these 3, economic, social, and environmental, and the reform of global governance, to increase, especially to increase the representativeness of countries from Global South. There are also 3 task forces very related to agriculture. All of them: Global Alliance Against Hunger, Climate Change, and Bioeconomy. We call it Bioeconomy Initiative. In the agricultural group, we have also 4 priorities. We have 4 priorities. And we have to remember that the context is agriculture is facing a lot of challenges. This climate changing, this agricultural prices, food prices very high, and agriculture is being expected to mitigate, but it also has to adapt to climate change. It's suffering the effects. It's the sector of the economy that suffers more the effects of climate change. And but so in the agricultural working group of G20, we expect to deal with sustainability of agri-food systems in the general role. Agricultural trade contribution to the food security and nutrition security as well. I'll tell about 2 or 3 words later on about that. The access of small farmers and small fishers to international trade, to world markets, and to integrate fish and aquaculture in global trade. Fisheries and agriculture in aquaculture in global trade. The importance of AMIS is highlighted by the G20 Brazilian presidency. I think my predecessors had already talked about that, the success of this initiative, and the one that is the most successful probably during the G20 existences. We would like also to broaden the scope of AMIS discussions. It's already happening. It's already happening. Agriculture and climate change, agriculture and fertilizers, logistics, more commodities, oil, vegetables, oils. Probably a bit more on agriculture and climate change to try to model something, because that's scaring everybody. Mm-hmm. And the impact of trade, I think that's my personal opinion, that's probably the most important. Mm-hmm. I was very happy when you told that about the wheat prices. We, as Brazil is a very big world exporter, food exporter, but we are importers of wheat. And we said that, but during this short period, it already made problems. We have, the agricultural policies, they don't allow, of many countries, surprisingly many countries, not allow for the farmers to respond to the market stimulus or the market signs. And so we have that. I'm very happy that I was not following it as close as that we consider that the response was quick. I was very happy to listen to that. And so I'm also happy to hear, it's like a book of macroeconomy. We're dealing with asymmetry of information, decision-making for policymakers. We're making with public goods. To finish here, I would like to show an example that it went to my heart. Last year, we had a meeting here with coffee country growers, and I had a talk with a representative of an African country that grows very good quality coffee, better than Brazil. If I'm not wrong, it was Kenya. And the price they were receiving for coffee was less than 20% of the Brazilian average price. That's heartbreaking. It's not the role of AMIS up to that point, but up to a certain point, yes. So let's finish here. I'm scoring my time, 5 minutes. Let's leave time.
Perfect. No, you've been perfect in time, and thank you very much, first of all, for confirming Brazil's intention to continue the G20 support. For us it's very important just to also say that, of course, as Secretariat, we are very open to any feedback that the G20 group has for us, any guidance for further evolution and change, and so very good to know that this path will continue. Ritsuko Yoneda is here from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry and Fisheries in Japan. So not so long ago, you were also G20 president, but more recently, you were G7 president. Japan was mentioned already by Maximo for its generous support to helping expand the activities of AMIS. So G7 last year really took a very interested, active approach in the work of AMIS, which in a sense for us was a new partner. For us it was always G20, but we very much appreciated that, not only because it turned also into a funding opportunity for us, but in general because it allowed us to also get our messages into another international forum, namely the G7. So what are your perspectives, Japan working with AMIS, and then also your decision to support AMIS in its expansion? Floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for giving me the floor. And as Denis said, we had a presidency in the G7 last year, and 5 years ago in 2019, we had a G20 presidency. And I was really clearly remember what was discussed in the AMIS, our Rapid Response Forum in local city of Niigata in Japan. There, all the members are focused on the importance of the transparency of market data. And actually, recently I had a chance to go back to the document which supported to launch the AMIS, and in 2010 maybe, and it's by the 10 international organizations, and that report is still available in the World Bank site. And at the beginning, looking back at the report prepared by the 10 international organizations, at the very beginning of the AMIS launch and the birth, data transparency is the main pillar and the main core. And it's really also important for Japan as a country, which is a net importing country of food. And in that perspective, as a policymaker side, we would like to, I would like to emphasize two aspects of the AMIS, as my previous speakers already mentioned. One is about the data hub, and also the second one is the rapid response forum. And as for the data hub, I think that the main competence of the AMIS is a collaboration of international organizations, plural, each of which has respective competence. For example, FAO has a competence in production and demand data, maybe. And also, I suppose the USDA covers everything, I suppose. And also, IGC has a competence in data in transportation. I cannot find any other platform without AMIS where these kind of good data, which has from the respective organizations, get together. That's the main important thing and the beauty of the AMIS we see. And the second one is that all the data has a reliable ones. And I remember that we had a discussion in our ministry at the very beginning stage of the Ukraine's and Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and there were so many analyses in the world, and we discussed about which one is most reliable. And we go back to the AMIS data, and what AMIS says, what AMIS shows about, and that is people's trust and the government trust to the AMIS, and that's really the good point I would like to pick up here. And as also the RRF, Rapid Response Forum, and this is one of the most important things I have been insisting. This is the beauty of the AMIS, because AMIS is, as many people mentioned, based on the G20 countries, and which covers majority of production and distribution and trade. So major producing countries and the consumer countries are getting together. And the countries can share the same information on the same table and ready for the policy coordination when something happens. That is an extraordinary settings and AMIS have. And as a G7 presidency last year, we really picked up those kind of beauties AMIS have. So we decided to do an increase of support. Of course, we have been supporting over years, but increase of support and decided to contribute $1 million last year. And that was actually came from my ministry, and it came from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I really feel envious, jealous on that. And this is for enhancing the IT or some other facilities AMIS to collect more data, and also to enhance the ability or capacity of scenario analysis, and then based on that data collected. So we really request the AMIS Secretary Art and the FAO Maximo to use effectively and correctly. And finally, we recently found that this kind of crisis happens every 15 years, maybe, with a different driver. So, what we learned, however, what we learned, for example, during the COVID-19 or Ukraine crisis, can be a discussion basis for the next time something happens. So, and we really emphasize on the contribution to the AMIS as a member countries, and expect AMIS role to provide some information, to provide a good information to the member countries and the world beyond. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Ritsuko, and of course, again, in the name of AMIS, the Secretary, thanks to the government of Japan for providing this funding and helping us really expand and respond to the growing demands that we see from users, and hopefully we will be able to respond effectively to those. You mentioned trust as one important output. Yes, there's so much data out there, but maybe AMIS is a mechanism sort through this information and to really say this is the relevant information, this is maybe more the noise that you should not look into, which is a very interesting segue for me now to bring in Arnaud Petit, because so he's the executive director of the International Grains Council sitting in London. So a very important partner for us. As I said, IGC, USDA, FAO, we were already doing kind of the work that AMIS is now doing based on balances, supply-demand analysis, and so forth. So at the onset of AMIS, there was a bit of this fear that there might be duplication and competition with existing data providers. Now, looking back, you personally have been involved 5-6 years now also with the work of AMIS. The IGC relatively quickly came also on board as a member of the Secretariat. How do you see that? Is there a duplication, or is it more collaboration, complementarities? And what do you see as next steps in the evolution of AMIS to maybe continue on that path? Thank you. Arnaud, over to you.
Thank you, Denis, and thank you for allowing me to be part of your panel discussion. Just to address quickly the matter of competition between IOs, if I just bear in mind the words from Maximo, competition is good. We don't need too much concentration. So this is why it's good that between different IOs, there is a possibility to work and to share the different analyses. And if I go, for example, on supply side, today, worldwide, you have only 3 international organizations which provide that information. Only 3. It's not a plethora of opportunities. FAO and AMIS, FAO, USDA, and IGC. That's really the 3 organizations which provide every month regular information on supply and demand. So really, it's important to get that diversity, but exchanging at the same time. And the plus of collaboration in this supply and demand, for example, is GeoGlam. GeoGlam bring a tremendous amount of information in order to get an earlier stage in information on plants status and to assess the crops status for production. So definitively working together and including GeoGlam, all this international organization have been able to provide more timely information. I think that's the important part. The second point I would like to highlight is stocks. As Maximo rightly pinpointed, it is right that stocks continue to be the most challenging part of the equation for international organizations to talk about. But I would say if we look about the last 5 years, the experience I have in working together with AMIS and the Secretariat of AMIS, indeed it has been very interesting to see how each of us are using that information of stocks. I would say for some of the international organizations, stocks is important in the angle of food security, but for others, it might be the matter of trade, how to anticipate trade positions from some countries. So I think here's a discussion we have been able to develop within AMIS has been very useful, not to align our figures on stocks, it's not subjective, but to have a better understanding of what the market trend could be for the coming year. And it has been very useful. And now I would say if I look about the discussion we can have in information group, more or less we have a good understanding of the situation. So we don't have necessarily the same figure, but we have no surprise about the position of some countries when they come on the global market and try and start to buy. And my third point I would like to highlight is trade. Definitively, that's the point we really explore as much as possible. And I would like to remind that trade is driven by demand. And what we see in terms of demand, there is more and more distanciation between where the grain is produced and where the grain is consumed. Therefore, trade is more and more relevant to look at, not anymore necessarily in terms of supply. It's important in terms of stocks for the supply side, but the question is more now for the consumer side. And in that aspect, I would say to explore volatility on the grains market is something we need to revisit, because we have seen that today, if the price, for example, of wheat has decreased tremendously at the consumer level, it's not what we can see, meaning consumer importing countries, because there is other factors like the exchange rate moving quickly. So this is why volatility should be revisited in that way. Also, we have seen now some times to time some divergence of prices. If I look also on wheat, you could see from different regions, we see some divergence of prices. That means there is some point of inflections we need to really to explore. So definitively here, the knowledge between different international organizations will be useful to work on these inflation aspects. The second point is logistics. As IGC, we have been able to work also in collaborative way with OECD on the port connectivity, and today with the WTO on real-time shipping data. That's really something important is we can, between different organizations, try to develop collaboration and use some information. As IGC, we don't have necessarily all the human resources to analyze all the data and look forward. So this is why we focus really on how we can use this real-time shipping data to make it the most reliable, and then for other organizations and to use on the daily works. And definitively, logistics is something very important to look at in the near future, because as it has been reminded, so Panama Canal is in the trouble for climate issues. We have now the Red Sea crossing and also under stress. So definitively looking on logistic and maritime logistic is something very challenging, but also relevant for the future. And the last point maybe I would like to highlight is rice, because we talk a lot about grains, and it is right that there is a tremendous transparency on wheat, on soybean, on maize. But then when we talk about rice, it's really a specific market, which is only operating on spot prices. Don't have futures on rice. So you have this risk which has been highlighted by Maximo of asymmetry of information. Today on IGC, if we look about the FOB prices we are monitoring on rice, we have maybe less than 20 prices. When on wheat, we have more than 100 prices. So you see really that the gap in terms of market information we can have on rice. And relating to trade policy measures, that's the same. If you look about the rice market, is maybe much more exposed in terms of disruption by trade policies and all the markets, global markets. So definitively, I would say if we look forward, the working on rice and try also to continue to improve the market transparency in the rice market could be also evaluated for organization and also for food security, because the specificity of rice is 99% of rice is going to food. So that's really a commodity market, which is really linked to a food security. That's the main point I wanted to highlight in a way that you see it's not a matter of competition between each organization. It's better understanding of the specificity of each organization, and in order to organize a complementarity and some works developed by some organizations. As I said, we as IGC benefit from the tremendous work of Geogland to provide us information on supply. And when we disclose information on trade and logistics, it is also useful for the international organization. That's really the way we play at AMIS Secretariat, and there is a very now new challenges coming in, and that's really a dynamic approach where I don't see, I would say, AMIS staying like it is today. It will continue to integrate new challenges because, as it has been said, trade is moving, challenges on global market are also new ones, and that's the organization in one way or another has to reply to these challenges. So AMIS will not be static. That definitively, that's my ending words now, and over to you, Denis.
Thanks so much, Arnaud. Let's stop here with the panel. Now it's back to you. Please come with your questions, raise your hands. While you prepare your questions, let me just briefly respond to Arnaud. Thank you for clarifying that, yes, working together, collaborating doesn't mean we align, we harmonize everything, that the outcome should not be expected that now all the existing data providers say the same thing, but if we do say something differently, Arnaud, correct me if I'm wrong, we know now why we have different perceptions of the market, and maybe our methodologies differ, and that was something which did not exist before. There was simply seen one seems to be the better number than the other, but now we recognize actually all three data providers, in case there are discrepancies, they have good reasons for these differences. The other thing I just wanted to highlight and also thank the IGC. As you said, you benefit a lot from the contributions get from Geoglam. On the logistics side, that is something which was brought to our table that we need to respond to. IGC already moved in that direction very swiftly also. And just to give you maybe a hands-on experience how this collaboration works out, we have, as AMIS, as FAO, been asked for a briefing on the situation in the Red Sea next week. And I could call on my colleagues in the IGC to provide some information that they could that they've prepared for their members, and they were kind enough to share that with us in the spirit really of this common good that we have with AMIS. And again, I think 10 years ago, certainly before the creation of AMIS, such collaboration was unthinkable. So I think that is also just to give you a real example of how we are benefiting from this collaboration. So I don't see any, I see a hand up. Fantastic.
Okay, my name is Nina Jansen. I'm working for VDMA, that's the Agricultural Machinery Association, but I'm also talking for the European Umbrella Association, which is located in Brussels. Thank you so much for explaining to me what work is already done for like drawing the whole picture of also in regard of food security and how to food security. So my question is, coming from the industry side, to what extent do you already consider the availability of machinery as a really important enabler to get the most out of the harvest or out of the fields, since we are trying to lose the least and try to make sure that the most is actually harvested, stored, and all that. Is that already in your consideration? Do you plan on this? That's my question.
Thanks for this question. Maybe if we can collect 2 or 3. Let me see if there are other. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Nancy Aborto, FAO. I come from the nutrition division, and I appreciate this presentation. I learned a lot about AMIS, even though I'm from FAO. It's not my area at all. But I'm really interested in the ability for AMIS to provide so much rich real-time information about these commodities that are so important for food security and nutrition. And in nutrition, we have a lot of interest in diversified diets, which include other commodities as well as perishables. So I'm wondering what's a vision for integrating other commodities or linking to other surveillance systems or teaching so that other surveillance systems that struggle with the ability to provide this real-time data could be enriched from the lessons that are coming from the success of AMIS. Thank you.
Okay, the third, fantastic. Okay, yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, everyone, for this great presentation. I'm Nicholas Rubio, the Agriculture Counselor for USDA based in Berlin. And you mentioned some of the crises that we've dealt in the last few years, and today the Red Sea tensions and potential disruptions logistically. And so I'm wondering what kind of information AMIS is already providing to the market and government about what this could mean in terms of prices and availability of various commodities. Thank you.
All right, let's stop here. So I have 3 questions just to summarize. One is on the impact of mechanization on harvest, getting out the best yields, losing the least. Then the nutrition question, how we as AMIS would maybe also consider broadening the list of commodities in the light of promoting a diversified diet or linking it other existing data systems. And then the question on logistics already, what AMIS can provide. Looking here at my panel, Maximo, you want to take one of those?
Yeah, I can try to briefly take the 3 on them with one answer. So AMIS has a very clear objective, which is reducing asymmetry of information, increasing transparency for markets to work smoothly. And we are talking of cereal markets and now vegetable oils that is being included, and fertilizer markets. That's the job of AMIS. We shouldn't create more objectives, because then it's impossible. Even with those very well-defined objectives, we are facing significant challenges and we need to keep working intensively. So I think the message is, let's be very careful here. The AMIS has a role. Let's don't bring 20 roles, because then we don't have nothing. So let's be very careful on that. Most of the countries that are cereals exporters that are part of the AMIS process are the big exporters. Those are completely automatized. Ukraine, the US, Brazil, Argentina. These are countries that already are automatized and they are minimizing losses across the board. The issue of automatization is more on countries which don't have that capacity, no? And that's where other agencies have to work on that, including FAO as an agency. But in the case of AMIS, key exporting countries, I don't see that as a problem, because they are fully automatized. But it could be my colleague from Brazil will correct me if I'm wrong. Also, the commodities are the commodities we're working. We cannot expand. AMIS is trying to make markets work well so that we can resolve asymmetries of information on those commodities. So it's not a goal to diversify diets and so on and so forth. It's basically making those commodities in the world to work fully. And on the logistical part, that's what we are trying to do. That's what we are working on. But we have to be very careful too, no? Because many of these issues, like what is happening with the water levels in the Panama Channel, is creating congestion. What could be happening in the Red Sea and the cost of insurance and increasing in cost of transportation, what could be happening on the oil prices and so on and so forth. All those issues, we need to look at them carefully, because the last thing you want is to come out and create some panic. So it's not one part of the transportation. We need to look at the whole thing itself, collect all the information, and then come out if it helps to increase transparency in the markets.
Eduardo?
Not to correct, only to add an information. About machinery, I could say about Brazil, okay? Probably we are well supplied with machinery, not for small farmers, but when you go to the storage capacity, there's huge opportunities for business there. Very huge. We still don't have the storage capacity. About diets, a word about the 4 commodities and vegetable oils now and fertilizers. I think it's the opinion, okay? It reflects the poorness of our diets. These are the bulk commodities that we eat. It's the sadness of the story here.
Sergiy?
If I can follow up on that second point, I think even 10 years ago, we had to start somewhere with the very targeted set of the commodities. But then over time, the AMIS expanded. As I look back, as I'm coming back from the previous job to this job back, I look, and we are still somewhere there, plus vegetable oils and fertilizers. So I think at that time, I remember the discussion. It's not that we don't want to expand to other commodities, but the AMIS has very specific global objective to look at the global markets. Many fruits and vegetables are localized in the regional markets. There are a lot of regional and local markets not coming together as the one single global market, right? So it's very difficult for AMIS to, because we also, as the World Bank at that time institution, we don't talk about food security anymore. We talk about the food and nutritional security, right? So FNS. And definitely, even at that time, 10 years ago, we were asking this question, can we go beyond those staples? Because our diet is more than what we actually reflect. But the reality is that AMIS cannot invent global markets for that, right? But it can help to analyze and bring transparency. That limits very much the expansion into those commodities which matter for nutrition. Thank you.
Okay, yes, Rizu.
Yeah, maybe I can add some following ups. Perhaps we are we have the responsibility why people from international organizations are humbling on speaking on expanding the AMIS role as a member country of AMIS. Actually, a member country has maybe a limitation to this is what AMIS should do. But from our perspective as a member country, they should have some synergy between AMIS itself and their participating organizations. For example, I talked about the data is coming from different international organizations which has respective competence. For example, we know FAO has a competence in a nutrition strategy, and also many of the analysis or books and the report and recommendation from FAO is based on the same data used in the AMIS. So that kind of collaboration is already happening. So what I would like to say is, yes, it is not written in terms of reference in the AMIS, but still, there have already been a collaboration on de facto basis and expansion of some relationship with the other policy issues like nutrition or food security. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Brief perspective, since I'm not the objective moderator that I should be, because I'm also representing the Secretariat. Again, I was not supposed to be moderating this, but allow me to take a position then for the Secretariat. Yes, of course, AMIS is dynamic. We're very receptive to the demands that we're hearing. We're checking on a continuous, regular basis with our political stakeholders, notably the G20. But if you ask them, really, the list of demands is endless, no? Something that is them working for wheat, maize, rice, soybeans. Yes, let's replicate it for livestock. Let's replicate it for pulses. In the context of promoting diets, climate change, maybe getting away from, also some normative goals connected to that. So I was very happy to hear also in the panel that there is a very strong understanding that we need to really stay to what AMIS is about, not overburden also the system. We have a very specific mandate. To some extent, I would argue that the success of AMIS over the past 12 years is also due to the fact that we stayed very true to our mandate. We didn't expand left or right just because a year there was, something was en vogue to go into a specific direction. We did incorporate where it made sense to strengthen our portfolio. The most recent crisis where we added now fertilizer, veg oil, and look more strongly into logistics, which of course we did already in the past, but we want to do that now a bit more strongly. In the past already, we were talking very forcefully about food trade choke points. Some of you may be familiar with this term. At the time, we didn't really get the support also politically to move there. And now this is coming back as a topic. No? So it is a giving and taking. It is observing, staying dynamic, and really doing what is possible within the context of the original mandate without overburdening the system. I think we briefly surely have to come to an end, actually. I want to bring in Joe Glauber, who has been very patiently with us in silent, sitting there at the middle of the night in Washington. Joe, you listen now to the entire session. You were supposed to be the one here moderating, so I hope I did a good job in your place. What are your observations now listening to what you've heard?
Yeah, no, thanks, Dennis. Yeah, no, and for those of you who don't know, like Maximo, like Sergiy, I was involved with AMIS back at the very beginning, and actually have had continuous involvement since then. And it is striking what sort of progress has been made over the last 12 years, or with AMIS. I think interest in markets, tends to be very cyclical. Certainly we had a lot of interest back in 2007, 8, 2010, 11. That actually helped create AMIS because of the high prices and high price volatility at the time. But I think, Dennis, as you can attest, the funding also waxes and wanes according to the interest in markets. And, you know, when unfortunately, when markets are very calm and prices are low, no one really pays much attention to AMIS, or I think fewer people do. But I think that the challenge is how to maintain capacity during that period. And I think that's been a challenge for AMIS, but it's not static. You know, I think what was mentioned, it's come out time and time again in this panel, is that AMIS is improving. We've added fertilizers, we're added vegetable oils, we've added, I think a successful webinar series where we are improving outreach. And as Maximo says, the plan is to improve analytical capacity. So all of this I think is very good. You know, when you look at Denis, you realize that's 1/3 of the AMIS team. It's a fairly lean and mean group. It's not a huge organization, but it does tap and leverage an enormous contributions from all the other IOs. And Arnaud mentioned GeoGlam, IGC. I mean, FAO is hard to imagine how we could do any of this without that, the effort of all that. And so I think that's the real challenge, is to take what we have and leverage that into a much, much bigger product. And I think, again, after 11, 12 years, I think it's been a success. And hopefully we have a brighter future in front of us. And with that, I apologize I'm not there. I had flight issues, but then more importantly for each of you, I also came down with COVID. So it's a good thing I'm not sitting next to you on the podium. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Joe. And well, I knew about your COVID infection, but it seems you're still holding up very strongly. So hopefully that stays this way. And in any case, quick recovery in case symptoms will arise. Arnaud, you had your hands up. Please be brief because we need to wrap up here.
Yeah, sure. Just maybe 2 points about the mechanization. I would do a link with digitization. And in some commodities, it might be interesting to get the access to the information which is linked to mechanization and digitization, particularly on quality, because that's something we were eager to find information, for example, is wheat quality, how we can assess what the wheat production will produce, which quality it would be. So definitively, there might be some interest in the future. The second aspect is about diversification, as it has been referred. We had an example we just introduced 2 years ago, pulses. To get an information on the pulses market, you need to first production, so harmonized system in terms of declaration of production, which is not necessarily the case in every country. Then you need to have a set of prices. That's the most complicated things, indeed, to get prices on such a type of commodities. And then you need also to have trade, and here you rely of countries having the same customs declaration system if you wish to compile the data. So it's an enormous work, and here I'm talking about 17 million tons of global trade of pulses. So you see how it's very a challenge to open, to diversify, I would say, the portfolio of activities for AMIS. And the last point about information on the Red Sea and Black Sea, we just did a short simulation about the rerouting of grain shipment from Black Sea to Asia. And indeed, we assess that the rerouting would represent a cost of $6 to $8 per ton. So that's something indeed we have to take into consideration as we see more and more vessels now are rerouting via the Good Hope Cape for the time being. So that's a possibility because we have access to real-time information and we can link to market information at the same time. But it is right, it takes time. I agree with Maximo. We need really to take into consideration different information before to provide such data available for the public. Thank you, Denis.
No, thank you, Arnaud. Thank you, all of you panelists here in the room, but also those online, and especially those staying up very late at night. Very much appreciated. But thank you, members of the audience here, for your active engagement, for your questions. I think they enriched the discussion here. We are, of course, open to hearing from you also after this. So you will find us online. There's an address of the Secretariat, so please come with any suggestions. Don't hesitate to reach out also directly to me. As you learned, I'm 1/3 of the entire team, so we wanted to keep that hidden. We wanted you to believe that there are hundreds of us sitting in Rome. No, we're actually a very small team. But as you learned, hopefully, in this session, AMIS is all about collaboration and on building what has already been done and bringing out the best of that. So with that, please, a round of applause for the panel here, and thank you again.